You know that moment your heart drops and your lungs forget how to breathe? Mine hit me the second I saw the gate swinging open, hoof prints scattered in the mud like chaos, and the distant thunder rolling over the hills as if the sky itself was warning me. My 3 rescue horses, gone. The paddock empty. The storm howling like it knew what had just happened. For a second I thought maybe they broke out, but the tire tracks leading away told a far more insane story. Someone had taken them. And not just anyone. Karen. The HOA's walking migraine. The woman who once called animal control on a turtle for loitering too long. The same woman who had been hovering near my barn earlier that day with a look in her eyes like she was on a mission from some deranged horse god. She must have waited for the worst part of the storm to roll in before making her move, probably thinking I'd be too distracted to notice. Except I always notice. These horses aren't just pets. They're federally registered rescue animals under USDA protection, with microchips, documents, and more oversight than most politicians. And Karen just committed a felony. Earlier that morning had felt like any other. The usual 5 a.m. wake-up call from Bo's neighing, the scent of alfalfa and wet earth, and the comforting sound of hooves tapping against the stall floor. I ran a private sanctuary for abused and retired horses that couldn't be adopted due to their trauma. Bo had been a parade horse until he was nearly worked to death. Luna was rescued from an illegal racing ring. And Jasper, he was born blind in one eye and still flinched whenever anyone raised their hand too fast. They were survivors. My job was to protect them. And yet somehow, a woman with a TikTok account and 0 credentials had just stolen them in broad daylight. Karen had strolled onto my property around noon under the pretense of checking on the animals. That wasn't new. She always had a reason to show up. Last week it was concerns about the horses' emotional well-being. Before that, she claimed the sound of Bo chewing hay was triggering her migraines. Today, she'd taken it up a notch. She stood by the fence with her obnoxious pink umbrella and her little dog yapping in her arm like a furry siren. You know, she said casually, they'd probably be happier if they were free. Like, actually free. Not locked in like zoo animals. I ignored her, like I always did. But I made the mistake of turning my back on her while I cleaned Jasper's stall. That's when I saw it, the way she was eyeing the trailer parked on the road just past the ridge. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe a delivery. Maybe a neighbor's visitor. I didn't expect her to be that crazy. But now, standing in the mud as rain pelted my face and the empty stalls stared back at me like hollow reminders of my failure, I realized I'd underestimated just how far Karen's delusion could stretch. I sprinted back to the house, half slipping in the mud, and yanked the tablet from the wall to check the surveillance footage. There she was. 3:46 p.m., wearing a reflective vest labeled Animal Wellness Officer, which I knew for a fact didn't exist, guiding Bo up a flimsy ramp into an ancient trailer with rusted chains. Luna followed hesitantly, and poor Jasper had to be tugged by a rope leash around his halter. She waved at the security camera like this was a friendly heist and drove off like she was heading to the county fair. I couldn't believe it. She'd actually done it. She'd stolen federally registered animals and filmed herself doing it like it was some heroic act. I immediately called 911, and to my surprise, the dispatcher took it seriously, very seriously. "Did you say federally registered?" she asked. I confirmed. She put me on hold. When she came back, her tone had changed. "You'll be getting a call from the USDA Animal Welfare Division in 5 minutes. Stay put." Sure enough, I got a call from a man named Inspector Garza, who had the voice of someone who hadn't smiled in 10 years. When I told him what happened, he paused, then said something that made my blood run cold. "If she crosses state lines with those horses, it becomes a federal transport violation under Section 122 of the Equine Rescue Act. That's prison time." I gave him the footage, the license plate, and even the direction she went. One of my neighbors texted me a blurry dashcam screenshot of her heading west. The storm hadn't hit full force yet, but it was coming in fast. I didn't wait. I packed my gear, threw on my boots, and loaded up my own trailer. I wasn't about to let Karen disappear into the night with animals that had already suffered more than enough. I had the horses' medical records, rescue registration tags, and even a notarized letter from the USDA confirming their protected status. Everything I needed to prove they were not just some backyard ponies Karen could liberate for clout. As I pulled out of my driveway, I called a friend who worked in the local sheriff's department. He patched me into the regional BOLO system. Be on the lookout. Within 15 minutes, the entire county was aware of the Karen horse theft incident. I passed 2 cruisers on the way out who gave me a knowing wave. The rain was coming down harder now, visibility dropping, but my eyes were fixed on the GPS ping showing the last location of that rusty trailer. This wasn't just about stolen property. This was about trust. About trauma. These horses had been brutalized, starved, neglected, and finally found peace. And now, some self-righteous suburban vigilante with a superiority complex and a fake rescue vest had thrown them back into chaos. I gripped the wheel tighter as lightning lit up the road. I didn't know exactly where she was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to find her. And when I did, she wouldn't just have to answer to me. She'd be facing a federal investigation, a very angry USDA officer, and 3 traumatized horses who deserved a hell of a lot better than this. The rain was relentless by the time I made it onto the main road. Wipers squealed against the windshield, fighting to keep my view clear as thunder cracked again, echoing off the hills like warning shots. The GPS ping from the dashcam footage wasn't perfect, but it gave me a rough direction, west toward the older part of town where the land started turning to scrub and forgotten plots. Karen didn't have the resources to take the horses far. Her own car couldn't tow anything larger than a lawnmower, so she must have borrowed that dilapidated trailer from someone just as clueless. I couldn't help but imagine her driving it like she was leading some noble crusade, her stupid little rescue vest flapping in the wind while my injured horses trembled in the back. It boiled my blood. About 30 minutes down the road, I spotted a rust-covered mailbox leaning at an odd angle with peeling letters that read Smith. I recognized the property. It used to belong to an older couple who bred goats before they retired and left it to their niece. That niece was Karen. The fence was barely standing, mostly chicken wire stapled to rotten wood. And beyond that, in the half-flooded yard, stood the trailer. My trailer. Or at least, my horses still inside it. My foot slammed the brake harder than I meant to, causing the tires to screech. I parked across the street and took a breath. The anger was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to let it control me. Not now. I needed proof, witnesses, and backup. I called Inspector Garza first. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had visual confirmation of the trailer and possibly the horses. He told me not to approach and that a USDA field agent was already en route. The local sheriff's office had also dispatched 2 deputies. "Stay visible," he said. "Do not enter the property. We'll make sure everything is handled by the book." I agreed, then hung up and called a neighbor, Cynthia, who lived a few blocks away and had helped me during previous animal rescue inspections. She had a knack for recording things quietly and knew how to stay unnoticed. Within 10 minutes, she was parked beside me in her SUV, phone in hand, recording everything. The fence gate creaked open a few minutes later, and there she was, Karen in all her chaotic glory. She wore a rain poncho over that same ridiculous animal wellness officer vest, her hair soaked and matted to her forehead. She had no clue she was being watched. With exaggerated care, she unlatched the trailer door. Luna stumbled out first, her hooves slipping in the mud. Karen tugged on her lead like she was walking a dog. Bo followed, his usually bright eyes dull and uncertain. Then Jasper came last, stepping gingerly, clearly in pain. His bandage was soaked and hanging loose. I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles ached. Karen led the horses toward what could loosely be described as a paddock, just a circle of broken plastic fencing around a soggy patch of weed. She tied them to a metal swing set. A swing set. Jasper nearly collapsed as she patted him on the back and shouted, "You're free now! Breathe, baby, breathe!" It would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerously negligent. Cynthia gasped beside me as Luna started trying to nibble at the moldy remains of an old pizza box lying in the grass. Karen was streaming live again. Her voice projected across the field like she was giving a TED Talk. "These animals have been liberated from imprisonment," she declared to the handful of viewers tuning into her social media feed. "They were being overfed, locked up, and emotionally stifled. I have brought them to a place of peace and energy renewal." Cynthia zoomed in on her phone camera as Karen twirled in the rain, soaking wet and completely unaware that two marked sheriff cruisers were quietly pulling up behind her. The officers stepped out and immediately called her name. "Karen Whitmore! Step away from the animals!" She froze mid-spin, confused, then puffed herself up like a rooster. "You have no authority here," she shouted back. "This is a sovereign animal sanctuary." That's when a third vehicle rolled in, an unmarked federal SUV. Inspector Garza stepped out, wearing a raincoat over his USDA badge. He looked every bit like the man you didn't want to argue with. Karen, of course, did anyway. "You don't have jurisdiction here. These horses are spiritual beings, not property. I am their guardian now." Garza didn't flinch. He calmly held up a clipboard, flipping it open to show a printed USDA record with all 3 horses listed, photos included. "These horses are federally registered rescues under the Equine Recovery and Rehabilitation Act. Their removal without authorization constitutes theft of federal property and endangerment of vulnerable animals. If you do not comply immediately, you will be forcibly removed." The deputies flanked him, hands resting near their holsters but not drawn. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked back at the horses, then at the live stream, then at the growing crowd of neighbors gathering at the edge of the property with phones out. "I'm being persecuted," she finally shrieked. "I have done nothing wrong. These horses begged me to take them." One of the officers moved forward to unclip Luna's lead, and Karen lunged toward him. That was it. The other deputy stepped in and cuffed her with a practiced efficiency that came from years of dealing with exactly this kind of crazy. She screamed the whole time about conspiracies, rescue rights, and horse sovereignty, whatever that meant. Her stream caught every moment, including the part where she tripped and fell in the mud while being led to the cruiser. As soon as she was secured, Garza turned his attention to me. He let me inspect the horses under his supervision, and what I found made my stomach churn. Jasper's stitches were torn. Luna's hooves were cracked from standing in pooled water. Bo had a gash on his hind leg, likely from the swing set's rusted chains. I took photos, documented everything, and made sure the mobile vet was called immediately. Cynthia kept recording. Garza was already making calls, ensuring the charges would stick. Before they loaded Karen into the cruiser, she shouted one last gem over her shoulder. "You'll all regret this. I'm the voice of animals. You're just part of the meat industry machine." The deputy raised an eyebrow and slammed the door shut behind her. I watched as the cruiser pulled away, the red and blue lights fading into the mist. I turned back to my horses. They were scared, filthy, and hurt, but they were alive. I could fix this. I would fix this. But Karen had no idea just how much trouble she was really in. The theft was just the beginning. The federal charges would come next. And then? A courtroom showdown that would be watched by every animal rescue organization in the country. She wanted to be famous. She was about to be. For all the wrong reasons. The next morning, I woke up to nearly 200 unread messages and over 30 missed calls. My phone had become a war zone of notifications. Texts from fellow rescue owners, emails from news reporters, voicemails from animal welfare nonprofits, and even a message from a late-night talk show producer asking if I'd be interested in sharing the story of the Great Horse Heist on national TV. I wasn't ready for any of that. My priority was making sure Bo, Luna, and Jasper were alive, stable, and beginning to recover from whatever trauma Karen's ridiculous stunt had inflicted on them. The vet had stayed most of the night at my barn, working through the rain to clean wounds, re-bandage stitches, administer fluids, and assess any psychological distress. Bo was mostly quiet, not his usual affectionate self. Jasper flinched at every unfamiliar sound. Luna stood rigid in her stall, her ears twitching constantly as if still anticipating danger. It broke my heart, but I had to push that pain down and deal with what came next. News of Karen's arrest had spread faster than I expected. It wasn't just the usual local gossip or a few comments in the neighborhood Facebook group. This was wildfire-level viral. Someone had clipped the footage of her shouting, "You can't arrest a rescuer," and falling face-first into the mud, and it was already racking up millions of views across every platform. The meme versions were especially brutal. One showed her face photoshopped onto a knight charging into battle on a hobby horse with the caption, "Liberator of Hooves." Another one had her mugshot overlaid with the words, "Wanted, for crimes against Hay." I didn't even know who was making them, but they were everywhere. Reddit had picked it up under r/EntitledPeople, and from there, the floodgates burst. It wasn't long before I was being tagged in threads with thousands of comments, most of them expressing outrage or disbelief. Despite the absurdity, there was a darker layer to it. Several rescue centers I knew personally began sharing their own stories about people like Karen, self-proclaimed animal activists who acted without licenses or knowledge, interfering with trained rehabilitation. Some had caused lasting damage. Others had been reported and banned. But none had gone as far as full-on theft. My story became a sort of rallying point, a case study in the danger of misplaced rescuer complexes. Animal legal defense groups started calling. One attorney offered to represent me pro bono if I wanted to pursue civil charges. And then came the USDA press conference. Inspector Garza stood stiffly behind a podium set up on the steps of the county courthouse. Cameras lined the sidewalk. Microphones bobbed in the wind like confused birds. He kept it short and professional, but he didn't pull any punches. He confirmed that the 3 horses were registered under federal protection and that their unauthorized removal triggered multiple violations under the Equine Protection and Rehabilitation Statute. He laid out the charges against Karen clearly: felony theft of federally registered animals, animal endangerment, impersonating a federal officer due to her fake vest, obstruction of an official investigation, and trespassing. He even hinted that additional charges were pending depending on the vet's final medical report. Karen's name was now etched into national headlines, not as a hero, but as an unhinged thief who thought she knew better than professionals. The best part? Garza brought visual evidence. Photos of the horses' injuries, footage of Karen tying them to the swing set, even a screenshot of her livestream where she declared she'd rescued them from horse prison. You could hear the reporters murmuring and chuckling during the broadcast. One journalist later wrote that Karen set back legitimate rescue work by a decade in under 24 hours. As all this unfolded, Karen's social media imploded. Her Facebook page, Hearts for Hooves, was flooded with angry comments, demands for accountability, and one-liners that would have made a stand-up comic jealous. Her followers had either vanished or turned on her. The moderators removed her from every animal rights group she was part of. Screenshots leaked of her bragging about rescuing turtles from public ponds and trying to report a neighbor's dog for emotional manipulation. The internet had officially decided that Karen wasn't a rescuer. She was a walking lawsuit in capri pants. Then came the next twist. Karen had hired a lawyer. Or rather, a lawyer had found her, likely for the publicity. His name was Vincent Flagg, and he looked like someone who practiced law from the back of a van. He released a statement to the press claiming Karen had been heroically protecting innocent animals from environmental neglect and had whistleblower protections under the Animal Guardian Doctrine. I'd never heard of such a doctrine, and neither had anyone else with a legal license. But Flagg was committed. He filed a countersuit claiming that I was unfit to house rescue horses and that Karen had acted under moral obligation. He even tried to sue Inspector Garza personally for federal intimidation tactics. None of it made any legal sense, but it made for great headlines. One article read, "Horse thief goes full tilt, blames victim, sues government." At first, I worried some of the public might actually believe her. That was before her own livestream viewers started posting unedited clips of her yelling at Jasper for not appreciating freedom, and scolding Bo for being a little too heavy. She'd effectively buried herself. Even still, I knew that in court, facts mattered more than memes, and I was going to need airtight documentation, expert testimony, and maybe a little bit of luck. I got a call from my USDA liaison later that evening. He confirmed that the federal case against Karen would proceed, but he also told me something I hadn't expected. Due to the national exposure, they were planning to bring in Karen's case as a key example in an upcoming legislative hearing about unauthorized animal interference. In short, Karen might be responsible for helping pass stricter laws, just not in the way she thought. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the irony was too thick to ignore. As the media attention continued to build, my barn became something of a local landmark. People drove by just to get a glimpse of the horses. Kids wrote letters to Bo. A teacher from a nearby school emailed to ask if they could do a field trip once things calmed down. One reporter asked if I'd be open to doing a documentary. I politely declined all of it. The attention was overwhelming, and I needed to focus on healing the horses, and truthfully myself. I stood in Jasper's stall that night, gently brushing his mane. He leaned into me a little, just enough to let me know he trusted me again. The storm had passed. The fences were reinforced. The locks had been upgraded. And Karen? She was about to walk into a courtroom filled with angry experts, federal agents, and undeniable evidence. She wanted to be the face of animal liberation. Instead, she was becoming a cautionary tale. And I still had a front-row seat to the disaster she'd made for herself. Court day came with a chill in the air and a line of spectators wrapped around the courthouse. I never expected it to become a public event, but apparently when a woman livestreams the theft of federally protected rescue animals while shouting conspiracy theories in the rain, people show up. Some came for justice, others for spectacle, and a few probably just wanted to see if Karen would say something outrageous again. I arrived early, dressed plainly, my documents organized and tucked under one arm, and my USDA liaison walking beside me. Garza met us at the entrance with a nod, looking every bit the no-nonsense officer he was, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning for chaos. It didn't take long before chaos arrived. Karen pulled up in a pastel pink van plastered with flower stickers, a hand-painted sign reading, "Animal Truth Warrior," hanging lopsided from the passenger door. Her lawyer, Vincent Flagg, trailed behind her like a defeated intern. Karen stepped out dramatically, wearing a cape, an actual velvet cape, with horse silhouettes sewn into the hem. Her head was held high, as if she was the one delivering a keynote speech and not facing federal charges. The moment she saw the cameras, she put on her best, hero under fire, expression and began yelling to the crowd about freedom for all four-legged citizens. Inside the courtroom, the judge was a no-nonsense woman in her late 60s who immediately made it clear she had no patience for theatrics. She reminded everyone that this was a federal case, not a circus. Karen tried to object to the term theft, claiming she was engaged in an emergency rescue mission. The judge silenced her with a glare and told Flagg to get his client under control. Flagg, clearly regretting every decision that led him to this point, whispered something to Karen that caused her to roll her eyes and mutter something about ignorance in the system. The prosecution began with the footage. The courtroom went silent as the screen showed Karen arriving at my barn in the middle of the storm, her ridiculous vest reflecting light in the rain as she cooed, "Come here, baby horses, Mama's got you." Bo hesitated. Luna looked confused. Jasper tried to back away. She still tugged him in anyway. The moment the video showed her waving to the camera before driving off, the judge actually sighed out loud. The prosecution then showed the aftermath. Photos of the horses in her muddy yard, tied to the swing set, their injuries clearly visible. The vet's report followed, confirming dehydration, infection risk, reopened wounds, and signs of distress. The judge asked for clarification on the swing set. When she heard it was held together by zip ties and scrap metal, she stared at Karen like she was staring at a dumpster fire. Karen was allowed to testify, and of course, she took the opportunity to turn the courtroom into her personal soapbox. She declared that traditional animal care was a government lie, that horses didn't need medical treatment but emotional resonance, and that she had performed a spiritual extraction of their trauma. She called me a hoarder of horse emotions, and accused Garza of being a hoof tyrant. At one point, she tried to play a voice memo of herself whispering affirmations to Jasper, claiming it was therapeutic evidence. The judge shut it down and threatened contempt if she continued. Vincent Flagg tried to redirect the testimony, but Karen insisted on explaining that her cape was symbolic of shelter from systemic abuse. There were audible snickers from the gallery, and the bailiff had to warn people twice. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I laid out the facts. The horses were registered, federally protected rescues. Their files had been updated with the USDA monthly. They were under treatment plans that included vet care, behavioral therapy, and controlled environment. Karen had no training, no certifications, no legal right to interfere. I explained how Jasper's injury nearly led to infection because of her negligence, how Luna had refused food for 2 days after being recovered, how Bo had stopped approaching the gate when I came to feed him. I looked the judge in the eye and said, "She didn't rescue them. She re-traumatized them." Garza followed with documentation from the Federal Registry, copies of Karen's fake vest, the social media posts bragging about her actions, and the long list of past complaints from neighbors and groups she had attempted to help. One report detailed her entering a backyard to liberate a tortoise, only to accidentally release it into a highway drainage system. The courtroom's tone shifted from absurd to serious as the weight of her actions became undeniable. Flagg's defense rested mostly on Karen's intent, insisting she believed she was doing the right thing. But as the judge pointed out, good intentions do not excuse illegal actions, especially when lives, human or animal, are put at risk. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that Karen's recklessness could have led to death or long-term trauma for already vulnerable animals. The defense tried once more to play the victim card, portraying Karen as a misunderstood activist. The judge was not moved. She recessed for deliberation, which didn't take long. When court resumed, she read the verdict with unmistakable finality. Karen was found guilty on all primary charges: unauthorized removal of federally protected animals, animal endangerment, impersonation of a federal officer, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Sentencing followed immediately. Karen was ordered to serve 18 months of supervised community service with a licensed animal therapy center. She was banned from owning, fostering, or interacting with any animals without a federal review. She was fined heavily for damages, vet bills, and violation of property rights. But it was the final part of the sentence that left the room silent. She was required to undergo psychological evaluation and take a mandatory course in animal welfare education before ever being allowed near a rescue center again. Karen tried to protest, shouting something about the Constitution and cosmic animal energies, but the gavel cut her off. The judge dismissed her tantrum without flinching. As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed. Garza slipped out a side door, and I barely made it through without being asked for interviews. I declined all of them. I just wanted to go home. On the way out, I passed Karen as she was being led away. Her cape was soaked, her face blotchy, her eyes wild. She glared at me like I had stolen something from her. But I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the clouds had finally broken apart, a streak of sunlight cutting through the gray. I stood there for a minute, feeling the warmth. I thought about Bo, Luna, and Jasper waiting at home. I thought about everything they'd endured, and everything I'd fought through to protect them. Karen might have thought she was the hero of her story, but now the world knew better. And the next time someone thought about pulling a stunt like hers, they'd remember this case and think twice. 2 weeks after the trial, things began to quiet down around the barn, though life hadn't returned to normal, at least not the normal I once knew. There were fewer reporters at the gate and fewer curious neighbors peeking in from their cars. The frenzy of Karen's viral downfall had begun to fade into the ever-churning social media memory, replaced by the next outrageous story. But for me and the horses, recovery was slow and intentional. Jasper finally began letting me touch his bandaged leg again without flinching. Luna nuzzled into my chest when I brought her fresh hay. Bo started trotting on his own across the paddock again, even if a little cautiously. They were healing, but the scars weren't just physical. They had been torn from safety, jolted into chaos, and dumped into the backyard of a self-proclaimed savior with no clue how fragile their lives were. I spent more time with them than ever, walking with them at sunrise, feeding them by hand, and even sleeping in the tack room some nights just to be near in case they stirred. People from all over the country had sent letters, gifts, even donations, enough to upgrade the barn's security and invest in a brand-new rehabilitation enclosure lined with soft rubber flooring, temperature control, and state-of-the-art medical stalls. A retired equine therapist offered to volunteer every weekend, and a vet tech sent from a neighboring state dropped by twice a week to check their progress. I hadn't asked for any of it, but the outpouring was humbling. What Karen had meant for disaster had somehow become the catalyst for a stronger, safer future for the horses. Meanwhile, Karen's own journey had taken a sharp turn in the opposite direction. True to the court sentence, she had been assigned to the Whispering Trail Equine Therapy Center, a serene and respected facility known for working with trauma survivors, both human and animal. Under close supervision, she was required to clean stalls, scrub water troughs, sweep barns, and feed horses, all under the eye of licensed professionals. Her cape and vest had been confiscated. Her phone was locked in a locker every morning. No live streams, no hashtags, just work. Real, gritty, humbling work. At first, the staff told me she resisted. She argued about which way hay should be spread, insisted horses needed crystals in their feed buckets, and tried giving impromptu speeches on animal telepathy. But over time, the complaints quieted down. Whether it was humility finally settling in or the reality of having to shovel manure at sunrise, Karen began to change, or at least grow silent. Word of her mandatory assignments spread across her old circles. The same online communities that had once cheered her now mocked her. Her attempt to create a documentary about her trial was blocked by legal injunction. Her countersuit had been thrown out with prejudice, and her name had become shorthand for everything rescue professionals warned against: arrogance disguised as compassion. Even her HOA, perhaps the most unexpected twist, issued a community-wide letter denouncing her actions and enforcing new rules around animal ownership, citing her incident as a civic embarrassment. The HOA president, a rigid man named Clive, who once fined me for using the wrong mailbox paint, had personally apologized for underestimating her capacity for chaos. That alone felt like an eclipse. One afternoon, as I sat in the paddock with Jasper curled beside me, I received a call from Inspector Garza. His voice, as usual, was calm and direct. He told me something I didn't expect. Apparently, while reviewing Karen's case file, the agency discovered that she had a long-standing warning on her record: 2 previous incidents where she interfered with protected wildlife habitat. In one, she'd released caged rabbits from a recovery center, believing they needed fresh air and sage smoke therapy. The consequences of those actions had been minimal at the time, written off as eccentricity. But now, combined with her felony conviction, her behavior had triggered a more serious review by a federal watchdog committee. Garza explained that Karen would not only remain under probation but might also be subject to permanent restriction from federal properties and any government-certified animal facilities. She wouldn't be pulling this stunt again. As strange as it sounds, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Not defeated, just weary. The whole ordeal had drained something in me, something I hadn't realized was fragile until I saw my horses disappear that night in the rain. But with that fatigue came something steadier, a sense of clarity. I had fought for them, protected them, and seen justice done. Not just through punishment but through awareness. Because of what happened, regulations were being discussed at the federal level. Bills were moving through early stages to tighten restrictions on self-proclaimed rescuers and ensure better vetting before anyone could claim the title. Karen had unwittingly handed the system a glaring example of what could go wrong. Her name now lived in legal briefings, committee memos, and training materials. That was a legacy she'd never planned on. One of the most surprising moments came a month later when I was invited to speak at a national conference for equine rehabilitation leaders. I stood in front of a quiet auditorium, not as an expert, but as a witness. I told them about Jasper's limp, about Luna refusing to eat, and about Bo standing still for hours after he came home. I told them about Karen tying rescue animals to a child's swing set and calling it freedom. I told them how the law worked, how it failed at first, and how it eventually rose to protect those who couldn't speak for themselves. When I finished, they stood and clapped, not for me, but for the idea that people like Karen wouldn't get the last word anymore. Back home, as spring warmed the air and the barn glowed in the sunset, I stood by the fence and watched my horses graze peacefully. Jasper lifted his head and wandered over, nudging my side with a soft grunt. I scratched his forehead and leaned against the wood, breathing in the calm. We were okay. We were scarred, yes, but not broken. The barn was stronger. The story was told. And Karen? She had been unmasked, uncapped, and reduced to what she had always been, not a hero, but a warning. I looked out across the pasture and smiled, because now every inch of it was safe again. And nothing, no storm, no lie, no self-appointed savior, was ever going to take that from us again.